As a mining settlement, Gwalia had a lot of thirsty miners whose thirst needed quenching. To begin with, there were a number of sly grog shops, providing what was sometimes less than satisfactory booze. The government wasn't so much worried about the quality of the alcohol on offer, but it wasn't making any revenue out of it. In order to change that, a hotel was constructed with public funds in 1902. The cost of the construction was £5,429, and the hotel began operating in 1903. Wood used in the construction was largely West Australian, and the staircase is made of polished jarrah. The hotel closed in 1964 and only opened briefly to the public again in 2018. The old settlement at Gwalia is an exceptional example of what can be done to bring our history to life, and the State Hotel should be reclaimed by the government for the people of Western Australia. It would make an invaluable addition to the historic settlement, and something needs to be done soon, because in the 9 years since we first visited, it has started to deteriorate badly. The hotel has special historic significance, as it was the first hotel in Australia to be constructed by a state government. Other state hotels operated at Gwalia, Bruce Rock, Wongan Hills, Corrigin and Bolgart. Bolgart is the only other state hotel that still exists today. It takes a lot to stop thirsty miners from drinking beer, but in 1919 the only known beer strike in the history of Western Australia happened at Gwalia. The miners complained about the manager who they wanted sacked, about the dirty glasses, about the size of serves, the price and even the brand of beer sold. They submitted a list of demands and 50 residents boycotted the hotel. The strike lasted from March to September, but it's not recorded which side won. The sly grog shops in town would have certainly increased their trade during the boycott. When the hotel closed, it was left unoccupied and was vandalised. In the 1980s, there was a resurgence in mining, and the hotel was taken over and renovated by Western Mining Corporation for use as an administrative office. Since then, a new office has been constructed next door, and ownership has changed again, we believe. The hotel has been left to deteriorate, and in the last decade it has started looking very run down indeed. This hotel has enormous historic significance, and the fact that it's not being maintained and not used for anything but storage of a few bits and pieces is an absolute disgrace. Gwalia will transport you back into the 1800s and give you a glimpse of how miners lived in this hot, dry, dusty land. Up on the hill, the luxury of the mine manager's house stands in stark contrast to the squalid tin shacks that would have been like ovens in summer and ice boxes in winter. Many of the old buildings have been preserved, including the shops, boarding house, sly grog shop, garage, and of course the miners' huts themselves. This is an amazing attraction, and it's a must-see location on anyone's trip through the goldfields. The local shire has created a unique place that's a real credit to everyone involved. The rooms at Hoover House can be rented for overnight stays. The house has a wonderful old Wilk charm, as well as modern ensuite facilities. There's a lookout where you can see the mine workings, and a lovely green lawn where you can sit and watch the sun go down. People with self-contained motorhomes can stay outside the museum free for up to 3 nights. This gives plenty of time to explore the town. If your motorhome or caravan isn't self-contained, there's another free campsite close by at Malcolm Dam. The old town of Malcolm was once one of the most important in the area, and was at one time the administrative centre for the shire. Today, Nothing whatsoever remains of what was once a thriving town. John Forrest led an expedition through this area in June 1869, while he was searching for the lost Leichhardt expedition. When Forrest returned to the area in 1899, in his capacity as State Premier, it had changed almost beyond comprehension. When John Forrest was a guest of honour at a dinner in Gwalia, the table decorations were 4 large bars of pure gold. The original Sons of Gwalia mine saw its beginnings in 1896, when Glendinning, Carlson and White pegged a claim on what would become the main body of ore. The prospecting party was financed by a man named Tommy Tobias, who eventually sold the claim to George W. Hall for £5,000. Hall recovered his investment in the first month of operation. In 1897, Herbert Hoover, who later became the 31st American president, started his association with the mine as a mining engineer. He had a lot to do with its early development. The Sons of Gwalia at the time was the second largest gold mine in WA and the largest outside the Golden Mile. At its peak, the population in Gwalia was over 1,000 people, and there was even a tramway constructed linking the town with nearby Leonora. It started as a steam-driven service in 1903, and this was replaced by an electric tram in 1908, and then petrol in 1915. The service ran until 1921, and by 1923 the rails had been pulled out, and no sign of the tramway now remains. There was a great rivalry between Leonora and Gwalia, with Gwalia originally being the larger settlement. When the railway terminated at Leonora, the fortunes of the towns were reversed, and Gwalia began a slow but steady decline. In the late 1930s, the mine constructed a swimming pool that had the threefold purpose as additional water storage for the mine, water for firefighting, and as a public amenity for the town. At the time, it was only the second public swimming pool in WA. The town's long decline began in the 1920s, when large numbers of workers were laid off, but operations at the mine continued until 1963, when the mine finally closed, and the population dropped almost overnight from nearly 2,000 to just 40. By the time the mine closed, over 21 million ounces of gold had been extracted. In 1972, the Gwalia Historical Gallery opened, and a committee formed to help preserve some of the area's gold mining history. A little bit more information here about Herbert Hoover. Hoover graduated from Stanford University in California, USA in 1895 with a degree in geology. He applied for a position with the British mining company Berwick Moring & Co. And despite the fact they were looking for someone aged 35 or more, Hoover, who was just 22 at the time, convinced them to take him on. He sailed from New York in March 1897 on the White Star ship Britannic. Hoover arrived in Albany, and by May the same year had travelled to Perth before boarding a train to the goldfields, where he worked for a time in Coolgardie. His job was to inspect various mines and report on their likely profitability. In that role, he travelled through many of the goldfield towns. It was on Hoover's recommendation that Berwick Moring purchased the Sons of Gwalia mine on the 17th of November 1879. As manager, he introduced European miners, cut wages and increased hours, making him a perfect Republican. He also opposed ideas such as the minimum wage and workers' compensation. They were, in his opinion, unfair on the owners of mines. Hoover was transferred to China in 1898 due to an open feud with his boss, but returned to Gwalia 4 times between 1901 and 1907. In 1908, Hoover left Berwick Moring soon after the company became embroiled in claims of fraud and mismanagement. He then became an independent engineer. By 1929, he had become the 31st President of the United States. He was not a particularly popular president, and served only one term before being soundly beaten by Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1932. Roosevelt went on to become arguably the greatest president in the history of the United States. Hoover became more and more right-wing as he got older. The ethnic makeup of Gwalia was heavily influenced by Hoover, who brought in Italian workers in an effort to cut wages.